First of all, before I just go through the presentation, just wanted to say a few things generally about quality. I've been chairing a working group at the Housing Forum, so a plug for the Housing Forum. Those of you who aren't members, you should join up. A very useful cross-sectoral body to help bring us all together. You know, there was some discussions earlier on this morning about whether or not as an industry we're able to represent ourselves jointly. So bodies like the Housing Forum are very useful to bring disparate voices together. And so the report that we're producing on housing quality is going to make some recommendations to government. And I'll just tell you a couple of them in advance of its publication in about a month's time. So, for example, we're recommending that government direct its efforts towards the part of the market that's interested in housing in the long term. Now, I think that penny has dropped in government, and I think that we're going to see policy changes towards the social sector and the affordable sector and looking at housing in the long term. Because from our perspective, the rental part of the industry is the part of the industry that cares about the long-term product, how long it's going to last, what the sort of quality of it is going to be, how it's going to be after 20, 40, 60 years. Also, a piece of work that HTA have done with the Housing Forum in the past is about the whole issue of labeling and informing people about performance. And the HQM, aims to help to advise buyers of new homes of specific elements of its performance. And our view is that the more information and data that consumers have at the point of purchase, the more informed they are, and the more that they can help to drive the sector across the piece to kind of up its game in terms of quality metrics. We buy almost everything else by comparing products against each other. So we think the industry should get on that particular tack and support a more end-user driven industry rather than being so much about supply driven. And another one is having a design champion actually throughout the whole project. One of the problems with the multifaceted industry and the procurement methodology that we use is that we often switch designers, for example, sometimes change contractors subcontract design down the supply chain. So actually having somebody who's responsible for the quality all the way through the project seems to us to be a pretty good idea. Would suggest for starters that using the architect to do that job is probably reasonable, and we're certainly up for that challenge. So a question about quality versus procurement is making sure that you're setting out very clearly what it is you're trying to achieve in your procurement methodology. So I won't go through any more of those, but simply say to watch out for that report. It'll be coming out in about a month's time. So briefly, HTA, for those of you who don't know us, we're about 180 people or so based in London, Edinburgh, Manchester, Bristol. We're a housing-led practice. We don't get involved in things that don't primarily involve housing. We're multidisciplinary, so we have a planning team, sustainability team, which I lead, landscape architecture. And we build things from beginning to end. We like to get involved in the construction of our projects. And we also work, in some cases, directly for manufacturers. So we have some projects where we're not working on a building project, we're working on the design of a construction system, as well as working with manufacturers increasingly to build buildings using fairly advanced prefabrication methodology. And our work in this sector is doubling pretty much year on year. So the bar on the right, 2017, it's accounting for about 1/3 of our turnover as a practice. So I think that growth is mirroring the changes that are happening in the sector. There's a lot of interest in how we might industrialize things to achieve both faster production and higher quality. One of the issues that other speakers touched on was this sort of question about, do you go for higher quality or do you go for more delivery? We don't see that as being two contradictory goals. Every other sector accepts that you can produce as high or higher quality and increase output at the same time through industrialization. So we don't see the two as being mutually incompatible. However, we need to be knowing about how we approach the subject and understand what it is that we're letting ourselves in for. So in particular, the clients in the room, I'd draw your attention to some of the blue bubbles on the right. If you're going to engage with a manufacturing system, you need to have a manufacturing-ready decision-making process. So you can't allow your decision-making process to hold up to manufacturing. If you're going to try and get the benefits of a faster process, then you have to change your processes to keep pace with that. Otherwise, you risk losing the advantages. In the same way, you need to be sure that your procurement systems are set up to help you in that way, rather than, in many cases, hinder you. Because a lot of the people that are delivering in this way aren't necessarily on frameworks, don't have the sort of the balance sheet that you might set in your procurement system. So you need to think about making sure that the tail is not wagging the dog, that you're able to get what you need from the project. A couple of other people have mentioned this, government 2025 strategy, faster delivery, lower emissions, improvement in exports, and lower costs. Well, we're seeing lower emissions and we're seeing faster delivery in our projects. We're not seeing lower costs yet because the scale of the market isn't at the point where costs are going to come down. And we're certainly not seeing improvements in exports. We're seeing increasing imports. And if you look around the park, you'll see that several of the most innovative products out there are coming from Eastern Europe, and soon we're going to have one on here from China. We're pretty convinced about the benefits of all of this. Quality at the top of the circle. At one of these presentations, somebody asked me in the audience, what do you do about snagging? And I had to stop and think about it for a moment, because we don't. The snagging for the pre-manufactured part of the project is done in the factory. So it arrives on site pretty much perfect every time. And that's because factories are set up to deliver the same thing day in, day out. And they have very good quality control processes, which are much, much better than site-based quality control processes, simply because a quality control supervisor can stand there and watch the product going by, and he doesn't have to climb 15 flights of stairs. He doesn't have to chase down a subcontractor on the west wing of the 15th floor. He can be there watching the product pass by every day. Waste is down to about 2% in the factory. And this is because factories see waste on the floor around them, and they don't like it. They recognize that's money wasted and lost. On sites, it goes into skips. It's all coming from different processes on site. Not one individual really, it's not their particular job to care about that waste. In the factory, it's around the people, it's getting in their way, it's a sunk cost. They recognize it and they do what they can to get rid of it. Inspiring careers, Mark talked about the need for bringing young people into the sector. We're seeing people in the sector now, legal in general, setting up a very interesting factory production system. They're not quite there yet, but it's setting up a really interesting factory production system which uses a lot of automation, a lot of very sophisticated technology, which would be inspiring to anybody out there who is interested in IT and manufacturing. So all of this, as far as we can see, are upsides. In terms of, just to give you some numbers, so we compared two of our projects. The yellow one is an off-site project, the blue is a traditional project, roughly the same project values, and the top bars are the construction period. So the off-site project took half as long to build, and you can see that at the beginning our production drawing time was roughly the same for both projects, because they were both roughly the similar scale. But then when they went on site, our involvement in the yellow project dwindles to nothing quite quickly, but the blue one, it ramps back up again, and as one of my partners says, that's us working to make the building a little bit worse as we go on, because what we're doing there is we're looking at product substitution, we're looking at value engineering, and so on and so forth. So we're kind of redoing work that we've already done once. And so we spent about 10 times the resource during the construction phase on the traditional project to the off-site project, We kind of achieved the same result, but it took us a year longer. So, you know, the maths are pretty straightforward for us. It's more profitable for us to work on off-site projects. It's more satisfying. We get the building built more quickly. There's a higher quality result coming out of it. And actually, we end up at the end of the project usually talking to everybody. Whereas with the traditional contract, traditionally, there needs to be a couple of years afterwards for the dust to settle and everybody to sort of get back talking to each other again. That's simply because of the adversarial nature of traditional contracting. So on a spectrum, you know, even on normal sites, at the very beginning, you're building about 40% with factory-produced components. And then going to the right, you get up to 75 to 80% when you've got really you know, you've got the facade, you've got the balconies, the roof, you've got the modules. That's about 80% of the project value. So if you're procuring, again, through a main contractor, the question then is, what's in it for the main contractor? So the main contractor is then subcontracting 80% of the project value to one or maybe two suppliers. So that's not a palatable project for most main contractors. So you need to think about, again, in your terms of your procurement, how you go about procuring one of these types of projects. So on our projects, they tend not to be traditional procurement for that reason. So how quickly and how well can we go? So from 2nd of February this year on the left to 17th of August on the right. So it's 28 stories of student accommodation in Wembley. So this is, you know, by far and away our quickest build. That started on site in November. It's being occupied by the students now. And we started working on it about the previous November. So that's within a 24-month period, we've designed, got planning permission, detailed drawings, built the building, occupied and handed over. So in terms of whether or not this can be done, we're pretty confident it can be done. We've done it. This is not going to be as quick for every project because this is our 4th or 5th project working together. So we've got a pretty good process in terms of us and the client and the manufacturer working together. It takes a while to get this fast, but this is the type of benefit you get from working continuously with the same team. So this comes down to a strategic business decision. In traditional procurement, you might say do 3 projects taking 4 years each in a 12-year period. You might do 4 projects taking 3 years each in the same period. Or if you go down this route, you could do 6 projects taking 2 years each in the same period. So you've doubled your turnover. So for us, it's less of a question about shall we change what we're doing on one project and make it a little bit more efficient, or shall we look at our whole business and think about how we can make our whole business more productive. So very quickly, a typical apartment. This is a build-to-rent apartment, living room and kitchen in the middle with 2 bedrooms and bathrooms either side. So built as 3 modules and delivered to site fully fitted out. A typical process is site works start on the left. At the same time, modules are starting to be built in the factory. In the middle, the modules are delivered at a rate of between 6 and 10 per day. And then on the right-hand side, once you get up to 3 or 4 stories, you start using mast climbers and you can put on the facade. So you've got lots of parallel working going on. And these are fully finished inside, quality checked, quality controlled, and locked up. So nobody goes into those modules except perhaps fit the IT system and the alarm system. So things that actually need a physical connection. And we design them so that we can make most of the services connections in the corridor side, so the corridors are generally left unfinished. This is also driving us down the line of looking at and thinking about these issues as we design the buildings. So thinking about how we deal with mast climbers, so trying to get away from scaffolding entirely, how we can deal with building the facade from mast climbers and cranes, rather than having slower scaffolding systems. And yeah, and again, our experience, from our experience, we've kind of developed a kind of set of rules in-house about how you deal with this. I wouldn't say any of this is rocket science, but still, until you've been through the mill a couple of times, some of it doesn't make that much sense. So we kind of work on putting our experience sort of down on paper, so that making sure that when we start a new project, that the project team understand how to operate and how to design. So it's about making sure that you start with this view from the beginning as early as possible. We would suggest that you should start this in stage 2. Think about how you're going to manufacture the building at stage 2, rather than leaving it until after you've got planning permission. By then it's too late. You'll have designed in the mistakes. So if you want to get the quality outcome, you need to think about it early on. We recognize that not everybody wants to go this sort of whole hog straight away on their first project. So there are sort of the partial offsite steps, panels, pods, and so on. But there is a question in my mind about that, and about whether or not, when you're putting together multiple systems, about the risks that accrue from that. So a traditional project has lots of interfaces between lots of different systems, and it's controlling those interfaces. It's not so much continuity of the size and shape of things, it's continuity of the interfaces between things. That's where it all goes wrong. So I'm not convinced particularly that the intermediary step is a particularly sensible approach, simply because you've got multiple systems to deal with and the risks associated with them. Whereas going all the way to the right with the sort of maximum version, the volumetric system, you've got all the risks in one pot, so you can manage that more carefully. You can have somebody in the factory, you can have a QA person who's based there all the time. And we also work a lot with different scales of projects. So again, there are questions about what's the most appropriate type of system for the most appropriate type of project. So there are some projects where we would like to go this route, but we can't, because the logistics means you can't get the truck down the road, or you have to move all the residents' cars to one side, and they're not going to be happy about that. So you've got to think about the site and the site access and logistics, crane positions, and so on. So all of this is bringing thinking from site back into the design phase, which we think is a good thing. Logistics, and then this is a project which is under construction at the moment. So this is a build-to-rent project. What's great is the idea that you can prototype it. So I think Angarad was saying that they had a prototype apartment which they used as a show home. So here the client and the manufacturer worked together, built a prototype in the factory. Client's team went and visited it, checked everything out, make sure that the quality, the finishes, the junctions, everything was as good as they needed it to be, and then that was then craned onto site and used in the building. So that kind of relationship with the manufacturer can only bring dividends, we think, in terms of the final outturn quality. And that's the project under construction. And then just a quick run through some other ones. So this is for Network Housing Association in the front here. This is affordable housing in Wembley. That's a build-to-rent building, the blue one, and the sort of corner is the end of a Novotel. So those of you who are Spurs fans who are going to Wembley on a regular basis these days, you'll pass this on the way to and from the game. And then a student building around the corner, another student building. This is Apex House, which is just finished. Build-to-rent building in Brentford. This is build-to-rent in Greenford for Greystar. So this is about 2,000 homes, and we expect a large proportion of this to be built using modular, because for a build-to-rent provider or any rent provider, that extra year you're getting for building the building that year quickly, that extra year's rental income makes a big difference to the balance sheet of the project. So it reduces your borrowing costs and brings you a large proportion of rental income. So again, how you cost this, it comes back to the procurement question, how you cost this in relation to your business plan. It's not just an estimation job. So don't give one of these things to your junior estimator to figure out whether you should do this. This is about a strategic business decision, not about a single on-project decision. So other projects which are in the pipeline. As I said at the beginning, we're getting a lot of interest. We're getting sort of calls from clients and manufacturers on a regular basis. It's been really exciting and interesting to us to be part of all of this. We only see upsides. But of course, there will be some problems. So the issue is, as an industry, the thing we must not do is go racing off and build one of these projects with an untested and untried and unassured system. Because the last thing we need is for one of these things to go wrong. So we just all have to make sure we're working together to make sure that the quality of the finished product is as good as we need it to be. Whether it's coming from China, whether it's coming from Latvia, Estonia, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, wherever. Thank you.
Excellent. A couple of quick questions. Anybody out there with a question around Rory's presentation? All stunned silence. Okay, so notice it's back on me to ask an intelligent question. Oh my word, can I? Yes, I can. Because I've got one I prepared earlier. So here we go. How do you, I mean, going back to the theme today around quality, how do you ensure that the design quality is really implemented and doesn't get value engineered out? What are the tools? How do you ensure that that quality maintains?
Well, I think that to turn the question around a little bit, one of the problems we've got is the design and build procurement methodology, where quality is talked about at the beginning of the project up to planning, and then it's value engineering from then on. And there's nobody managing the quality side of the problem. So I think clients just simply have to take that more seriously and be in the thick of the discussion on the value engineering side, and set out very carefully at the beginning their specification and stick to it, and not accept product substitution on the one hand. I mean, for example, we've got one of our projects that was built about 4 or 5 years ago, and there was a problem with the parapets. So some of our senior technical people visited the site during the week where they were opening up the parapets to check this particular problem. About 50% of the parapet detailing was different from the detailing of what we drew. So different products used in different ways. So that's somebody on site making it up as they go along. And what we're seeing on traditional sites is that even that work that's being made up as it goes along isn't being supervised properly. So none of us should be surprised if we're ending up with poor quality outcomes if you've got a process like that.
Does that go back to earlier on in the day when I think it was Mark Farmer showed the construction model and how it was broken needs to be changed, and that role for the integrator, which I believe at the beginning of your presentation you were saying, well, actually the architect could play the role of the integrator and ensure that the design and quality processes the integrity of them were maintained, and act to do the stops and checks and balances and provide that support.
Yeah, but we are still the consultant working for the client. So the client has to be firmly fixed on the goal of having that quality delivered, and then using us or a clerk of works. The clerk of works role has all but disappeared. So in many sites there isn't somebody actually watching out for the client. There isn't somebody who really understands construction and construction risk and defects watching out for the client. There may be other people, but they're not people who understand construction risk. So clients, you will get what you pay for. So you just have to have quality control built into your contract and your procurement routes.
Sure, and finally, I'll take a question. If it's that good a proposition, why is it still on the edges? Why hasn't it really become the more mainstream method of construction?
First of all, it's not cheaper. So, and anybody who says it is probably guessing.
But you've done the features and benefits, and you can show.
Yeah. So it works extremely well in the sectors that we've been working in. So build to rent and student accommodation and hotels, where there is rental income that you're targeting. In other words, there's a huge benefit for that additional speed. So the rental income from one of those student buildings is plus £4 million. So when you set that against the cost of the building, it might be 10% of the build cost. So it's a huge incentive. For affordable housing, it's a lower sum, but it's still a sum of money. And will probably, if there is a premium to be paid, that sum of money will probably pay that premium. But the problem is that historically, the people making the decision are the people on a particular project base, and they're not thinking about the business case overall. And also contractors typically are not the first people to leap into this, because as I said, they're putting 70% plus into one subcontract, and then they can't really manage that subcontract to get any further benefit. Whereas with other subcontractors, normally they would have 10 or 15 subcontractors doing all that work, and they can manage each one of them to get a little bit more benefit financially as the project goes. You can't do that with a prefabricated supplier. You have to start paying them as soon as they start manufacturing. And also, you can't change your mind. You can't substitute products, because once you've started manufacturing, you've got to keep going.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. So, would you still have that question?
Yes, hi. I've got two questions.
Could you just say who you are?
Sure, I'm Andrew Day from Telford Homes. The first question is about today, the second question is about tomorrow. What's the warranty provider's appetite for this level of innovation and ensuring? And I was at a recent presentation and it was discussed that in China they're starting to 3D print houses. When do you think that'll happen in the UK?
Okay. Well, on the warranty providers, I mean, these are all, these buildings have all been warrantied by Premier, I believe. And yeah, somebody said earlier on that NHBC don't appear to have much appetite for this. I think that's changing. I understand, because I think that NHBC recognize that the more of this comes into the market, the more of their market is going away from them. But I wouldn't hold my breath. So I think, but warranty providers, of course, is a really important thing. As I said, we must make sure that all of these buildings are really good quality. Somebody else was saying that there's no point in just replacing the existing construction sector with this methodology. We should be doing better and forging ahead, which I completely agree with. I don't see any point in building to the same kind of standards. Why would you? You can go much further with factory production. As for 3D printing, well, we're 3D printing buildings that high in our office at the moment, but I don't see that particular technology being useful here anytime soon, simply because the way our climate works and rather complicated building systems. But I think there's a long, long way to go at automation. I mean, I was really impressed by the Legal & General ambition in the factory. I don't know if you've been to it, but the things that they're setting themselves up to do are just fantastic. You know, so if we were building a large chunk of our homes the way Legal & General are planning to, I'd be really happy with that. You know, let's not go for the full 3D printed concrete squidgy stuff just yet.
Are any of you aware of the specific project at the University of Swansea?
I've been there.
Yeah, so that's not at a building level, but 3D printing of coatings on glass, 3D printing of batteries, and so the whole way forward using innovation amongst scientists together with product manufacturers like Pilkington Glass, for example, is that we'll soon be in a situation where we can have a building that can generate, store and release energy, as an example, all through the use of 3D printed coatings to do that. So it's well worth having a look. There's a lot of innovation and great stuff that's happening here on the park, but also within some of our academic institutions. So thank you very much, Rory. That's wonderful.